You are listening to the Courageously Unconventional podcast. If you want to change your life and start living on your own terms, you're in the right place. I'm your host, Lynn Grogan. I'm a certified life coach, and I want to help you take action toward creating your own unconventional life. Each week, I'll share inspiring and unconventional stories from those who have gone before you, as well as actionable steps you can take to start your own unconventional path today. Let's go! Welcome back to the Courageously Unconventional podcast. I hope you're doing well, my friend. So last week on the podcast, I talked about putting yourself out there to make friends. I'll put that episode link in the show notes if that sounds like something you'd like to listen to. And after that podcast, I got a follow-up questionnaire from one of my listeners who asked, so how do you prioritize deepening the connections once you've made them? I think this is such a great question because for most of us, having deep and meaningful relationships is one of the most important things in life. In fact, in Bronnie Ware's list of the top 5 regrets of the dying, one of the main regrets is, I wish I had stayed in better touch with my friends. So reflecting on how to answer this question, I decided to put myself out there and reach out to my community of coaches for advice. So I'm in this group with like 3,500 coaches in a Facebook group. And so I figured I'd probably get a few good ideas to share with you all. So I posted the question, adding context that I had recently done a podcast episode about how my husband and I were pretty isolated for 6 years and what helped us finally make friends. And I asked them to share how they would prioritize and deepen friendships. What I didn't expect is that some of the responses would be directly addressed to me, not to a general audience. Like they were offering me advice on how I could deepen my friendships. And I noticed that when I read these particular responses, my defenses immediately went up. Like I wanted to fire off a response like, no, you got it wrong. This question wasn't for me, it was for my listeners. My relationships are fine. I felt reactive to them almost as if I needed to protect myself from something. Has it ever happened to you? Like you get some advice and your first instinct is to push back, to be like, nope, I'm good. Yeah, my response definitely caught my attention. I wasn't expecting it. So I'm going to be sharing some of these coaches' advice in a few minutes. I wanted to explore why I got so defensive in case it's helpful to you. So one of the things I want to do on this podcast is to share what I'm learning and what I've found helpful along the way, because I think we can learn a lot that way. So my exploration took me back to childhood when I was first trying to make friends, when I was first learning to make friends. My parents got divorced when I was about 4, and some of my earliest memories are of being confused and lost. Like I didn't understand why my parents weren't together and why we were primarily living with my dad. So like I cried constantly, which, makes sense. I miss my mom. And there was probably a part of me that thought I did something wrong to cause the separation. When I started school a year later, I continued to cry all the time. Like the adults around me didn't really seem to know how to help, and as you can imagine, the other kids weren't exactly eager to befriend the crying girl, so I was kind of on my own dealing with this situation. So to function at school, I had to learn how to keep my emotions in check, and the message I kept hearing from adults was to just stop crying, so that's what I worked on, shoving my emotions down. And you know what? It worked. When I stopped showing so much emotion, the other kids were much more willing to be my friend. And so the story I told myself is that if I didn't show strong emotions or be vulnerable with people, they just liked me more. And I know that my story isn't unique. I'm sure you have your own experiences of learning how to be accepted. Like as kids, we all find ways to protect ourselves by presenting a version of who we are that feels more socially acceptable. We figure out what keeps us safe from rejection, what doesn't, and our personalities start to form around these techniques and adaptations that we've figured out. So your story might be that when you got straight A's, people praised you. And then it felt like in order to be loved and worthy, you had to keep achieving. Or maybe you discovered that when you were agreeable and said yes, people didn't get upset with you. And they just seemed to like you more. So then it made sense that you kept doing things like saying yes, even if at times you wish you could say no. These childhood adaptations shape how we show up in relationships as adults. So the kid who focuses on getting straight A's might grow up believing that they need to keep succeeding and be perfect in order to be valuable. And the kid who felt pressured to say yes might default to people pleasing and saying yes all the time as an adult. So, how do we move beyond these versions of ourselves to go and build deeper, more authentic relationships? Well, for me, like one part of the process has been acknowledging and healing from some of the ways that I adapted as a child. Like, I'm not going to dive in too deeply on how to do that in this episode, but if any of what I just said resonated with you, it's something that you could explore with like a therapist or a coach or even through journaling. What can be helpful to remember is that when you are trying to make friends as an adult, you might still be bumping up against those protective layers you developed as a kid. Like I said, I know that's been the case for me. Like, on the one hand, I feel overjoyed to make new friends. I've loved making new friends over the past 2 years. But then there's that other part of me that is constantly scanning for signs that someone doesn't like me. And my inner critic is telling me that, like, hey, Lynn, it's just a matter of time before you're rejected. So this is something that I've worked on with my own coach, and it's helped me recognize my patterns and calm myself down so I can stay open and connected in my friendship. But, if you're listening to this and you're like, oh my gosh, that's so much work to do ahead of time, you do not have to do like this childhood work first before deepening your friendships. In fact, like, I love the idea that we heal in community and that a lot of our growth actually happens in relationship with others, not in isolation. Which, as promised, brings me back to the advice from my coaching colleagues. So I want to just acknowledge my listener, the person who wrote in to me to ask this question, wasn't specifically asking how to deepen relationships, but it seemed more like it was about how to prioritize times for the ones that they currently have. However, I think, and this is why I steered the podcast in this direction, I think that by talking about how to create those deeper connections, you'll get a clearer sense of how to make the most of the time that you do have with your friends, especially if you're juggling a lot of competing priorities like raising kids, caregiving for family members, or if you're managing like a busy career. All right, so on to words of wisdom from my coaching community. I have 5 things for you here. 5 things that I pulled out of what they said that I thought were especially helpful for this conversation. So number 1, not every friendship needs to go deeper. So some friendships are going to be perfect just the way they are. Like, so maybe you have activity buddies and these are people that you want to go like hiking with, you see Taylor Swift with, you grab a drink with, but you keep things more light and fun. So these relationships, totally okay. Like, they serve a different purpose. They don't need to go deeper if it doesn't feel right or necessary. Some things we have in life just because it's fun. But let's just say there's that one person in the group who every time you hang out with her, you just like, you have the best time and you love the way that her mind works and the things she says, and you want to get to know her more. So step number 2, if you want to deepen a friendship, tell them. Just like let them know that you want to get to know them better. It might sound something like this. Hey, I really enjoy hanging out with you. I'd love to get to know you better. Do you want to grab coffee after our next yoga class? It's a little bit like dating. You have to take the initiative and risk them saying no. But they might also say yes, and that's where a friendship starts. So number 3, consistent FaceTime is key. I think most everybody in my coaching community said this. In-person time matters. So to build a deeper friendship, you need to have regular, consistent contact. Like I said, this advice came up over and over again. There is a psychological phenomenon that's called exposure effect that says we tend to like people more simply because we see them more often. So familiarity breeds connection. So to build that deeper relationship, you need to see each other regularly, but it doesn't have to be daily or weekly. Like, you can set up a monthly or quarterly meetup, and that can work too. So maybe after that first coffee, if things go well, you can ask them to hang out again. Hey, I really enjoyed this. Can we set up another time to meet? All right, number 4, create a base of positivity. So this advice came from Coach Zane Khan, who's in my community, and he shared the advice from friendship expert Shasta Nelson. She suggests that a strong friendship needs like a 5-to-1 ratio of positivity to negativity. So for every 20 minutes of venting and offloading and maybe even some complaining, you want to balance it out with like 80 minutes of fun and lighthearted moments. So maintaining this balance helps ensure that the friendship remains uplifting and enjoyable. It doesn't have to be that exact ratio. If you're like, oh my gosh, 20 and then 80 minutes, like You can do the math on a different ratio. And if you want to learn more about this, I'll link to some of Shasta Nelson's books in the show notes if you want to dive deeper. And finally, number 5, build vulnerability over time. Once you've established that regular contact and built up that positive foundation, true friendship, or what Nelson calls frientimacy, which is friendship plus intimacy, also requires vulnerability. So this means sharing your personal thoughts and feelings and experiences. So these are sharing the more deeper human moments that go beyond what you might post on Instagram or Facebook, and they help you create authentic bonds. All right, so that's my list of 5. And to recap, if you want to deepen the relationship, tell the person. And when building the relationship, you'll want to include the 3 key elements of frientimacy, which are consistency, positivity, and vulnerability. All 3 of those need to work together to create an intimate friendship, because too much vulnerability without positivity can make the relationship feel draining, whereas too much positivity without consistency can leave it feeling shallow. And overall, one common theme that has stood out to me from all of the advice shared is this: that relationships take effort. They don't just happen naturally, they require time, attention, and intention. And while that might seem obvious, it's easy to forget. I know I found myself in situations where, because I didn't make an effort to stay connected, months or even years went by and suddenly it felt awkward to reach out to someone. So if you want deeper friendships, you have to make them a priority in your life. All right, my friend, that is what I have for you today. I want to give a very special thank you to the wonderful coaches in my community who contributed to this episode. They're Danita Bremer, Sarah Yost, Zane Khan, Diana Murphy, Kenneth Lee, and Mandy Pratt-John. I appreciate all of you. So if you're curious about life coaching and you want to experience it for yourself, sign up for a free one-on-one private coaching session with me at lynngrogan.com or click the link in the show notes. Your first session is free. So thank you so much for listening. And if you enjoyed this episode, please share it with a friend or a potential friend who might find it helpful. Until next time. Hey friend, thank you for listening to today's conversation. If you're considering a major career or lifestyle change and you want to talk to someone about this, I'm here for you. You can learn how to work with me one-on-one on my website, which is lynngrogan.com, and I also have details in the show notes. See you next time.